Recording. Okay, welcome everyone here tonight to the next installment of our history of the Jewish people, and we are in 2 Samuel chapters 13 and 14, and we have been talking. It's the story of David, of course, in 2 Samuel, and here's his chronology. And so we're right down here now. We are in this. This year right here, 987 BCE, and you'll see that so all of these things take place within 987 within the next 5 years, the following 5 years, and it's kind of a tragic tale, and we'll get right on into it. Are there any comments or questions so far that, as you well know, all you got to do is undo your mute button on your own and talk to me. Here we are in this part here. We're talking about David's his relationship with his family, and again, I said it's kind of a sad tale. It's a dysfunctional family. And so, that a lot of things, the Bible doesn't sugarcoat anything. So if people have dysfunctional families in the Bible, it just shows, it tells about it. And you'll see, the patriarchs had their trouble. Jacob had his troubles, and in fact, some of the troubles that Jacob had then showed up later on in the Ten Commandments, or not in the Torah, not Ten Commandments, but in the Torah itself, about you don't marry sisters. You can marry sisters one at a time, but you don't marry two of them at the same. Have two wives that are sisters, because that didn't work out too well for Jacob. So now then it was codified. It wasn't codified before he did it, but then once he did it, it was made law that no, you shouldn't be doing that. So anyway, that was a rabbi trail. I don't even know how I got onto that already tonight. We got a lot of words to get through tonight for this story. Here is a. It didn't come out as clear as I wanted it to, but I was having trouble doing that. A family tree of David, because it's kind of, me and my maps. I like to have maps. Well, this is kind of a map of his family here, and the people that we're going to be talking about tonight are Amnon here, who was born to him from Ahinoam, who was he married her when he was in Hebron, and then Maacah, she was again, that was one of those that was from that time frame, and she bore him Absalom and Tamar. And then these other ones we'll talk about later on, because they don't figure in tonight's story at all. And here's my map, okay? And so down here we're going to be basically starting the story down here in Jerusalem, and that's where the story begins, and then we'll go back up to another part of it's going to be in Baal Hatzor, and then finally Absalom takes off and he goes up here to this area of the king of Geshur, and this area of Gamla. It's kind of up on this side of the Sea of Galilee. It's kind of rocky, but at the same time they have lots of good grapes and so forth. Back in those days, they had a lot of good grapes. And there's this city up here at the top. You see Gamla here. It's built on the side of a hill, and that was a great. They had a lot of grapes and lots of olives. They had olive presses, and I think Gamla was known for their olives. And then later on, we've all heard of Masada, because they made a big movie of it and all that kind of stuff. And that's the fortifications of it are phenomenal and so forth. And so everybody knows about Masada, but up here at Gamla, where where um, Absalom fled to, this area anyway, the Gamla, built on the side of a hill, when the Romans were basically trying to kick all of the Jews out of Israel. They went up there. There were 10,000 people living at Gamla, and rather than submit to the Roman Empire and become slaves, or their women being ravished or whatever, they just all ran off of the edge of a cliff, and 10,000 inhabitants from this city here all committed suicide rather than submit to the Romans. So that has nothing to do with the story tonight, but I just thought that was an interesting aside. Okay, see what you get. You really get your money's worth out of these classes. So chapter 13. Again, any comments or questions so far before we get going? All right. Chapter 13, we're introduced to three of David's children. Amnon, he was the firstborn. He was the heir to the throne, and or the heir apparent anyway. And he was born to Ahinoam, born for, that was David's wife there. And then these guys would have probably been in their late teens, early 20s. Amnon and Absalom, about the same age. Amnon being a little bit older than Absalom because he was the firstborn, but could have been only a few months. And in between those two, that there was another child born, Chileab, but he's not ever mentioned again. So it perhaps he might not have survived to adulthood, but because it was Amnon for the firstborn, and then by birth, Absalom would have been third in line for succession to the throne, but we don't know about Chileab, okay? And so Tamar, she was the full sister of Absalom, with her mother was Maacah, or another name for her was Abigail, okay? And so they were brother and sister. They had the same mother and father, and so that's all right. Just leave it alone. That's okay. So we're Zion's here, and she's rearranging some furniture for me so that she can close the door to my office and not disturb my class. So good for her. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read this first 6 verses here. Came to pass after this that Absalom, son of David, had a beautiful sister named Tamar. So Amnon, son of David, fell in love with her, but Amnon was so frustrated that he fell sick because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible in Amnon to do anything to her. However, Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, and he was the son of Shemaiah and David's brother, and Jonadab was a very shrewd man. Okay, shrewd meaning crafty and sneaky and yucky. So he said to him, "Why are you, the king's son, so miserable morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon told him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." So Jonadab said, "Well, lie down on your bed, pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me some bread to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so I may eat it from her hand.'" Amnon lay down, pretended to be sick, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please tell my sister Tamar, come and make me a couple of cakes in front of me so I may eat from her hand. All right. Okay, so that seems really hokey, that whole kind of a thing, but that was the plan that they had. They maybe they weren't as sophisticated in their plans and so forth as they would have been later on had they not been late teenagers or early 20s. But that was their little plan. And the idea that Amnon was in love with his sister, we look at that in today's world and you go, yeah, how sick is that? And actually, in Israel back in those days, the people would have said, yeah, how sick is that? But uh, so this idea, he says that he had fallen in love with Tamar. Well, it wasn't love. That what you would describe this as was just plain old incestual sin. That's all it was. Incestual lust. It was not love at all. And poor Tamar was definitely a victim in here, in that she was powerless in the whole situation. And women just didn't have that much of a status. And this guy Jonadab, called him a friend. Well, he wasn't even he was actually the cousin of Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar, because his father and David were brothers, so that would make them cousins. And as far as being a friend, no, he was a schemer and a conniver, and a pot stirrer, and it just I don't know what his motivation would have been in assisting Amnon to sin against his sister, other than just being a rascal. But in a lot of the things that we see about him and hear about him, he would seem like to be the penultimate court provocateur. The guy that's always scheming and going around the edges. If we were going to be doing a TV series, he would be a villain of some sort. Okay, verses 7. Then David sent someone to the house of Tamar, saying, go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare bread for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house while he was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, and made cakes in front of him and baked the cakes. Then she took the pan, poured them out in front of him, but he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, everyone leave me. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the bread into the bedroom, that I may eat it from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes she had made, brought them into the bedroom to her brother Amnon. But when she brought them close to him to eat, he grabbed her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. And she said, no. She said to him, don't, my brother, don't rape me, for such a thing should never be done in Israel. Don't do this disgraceful deed. And where could I go with my shame? You will be one of the disgraceful fools in Israel. Now, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. But he was unwilling to listen to her voice, so he overpowered her, forced her, and lay with her. All right, the guy was just a rascal. He's just a knucklehead. Okay, and of course David kind of got involved in this a little bit, because they asked him to say, hey, can you ask Tamar to come over to Amnon's house? He said, sure, why not? I mean, they're brother and sister sort of. So what did David know about any of this? He didn't. And so Amnon played the part that was dictated to him by Jonadab, and he evidently didn't count on, or didn't think of all of the other everything else that was in the in force here. I have to laugh here a little bit, because we got our two dogs, and Cynthia and Zion's two dogs here, and boy, they just wherever one of them goes, the other ones have to go. And when I'm at my desk, right up underneath my desk is one of their favorite spots. So everybody's trying to keep them keep them quiet and away from the class tonight. So anyway, uh, Amnon was not counting on his advances being rebuffed. Evidently, he didn't think this through, and so therefore, then when he reverted to force, and it's kind of like remember Joseph and Potiphar's wife, only that she was the schemer and he wasn't, and they use the same words. Hey, come to bed with me, come lay with me, and except for Amnon, it says my sister. So I mean, he was just a scoundrel. You can't call this anything other than just plain old rape. I mean, it was a despicable act, and just nothing. You can't sugarcoat it any way, shape, or form. Verse 15, then Amnon loathed her with very intense revulsion. Indeed, the hatred that he hated her with was greater than the love in which he had loved her. And I'd say, instead of saying love, lusted. So Amnon said to her, get up, get out. But she said to him, no, sending me away is even a greater evil than the one that you have done to me. But again, he would not listen to her. Then he called his servant that attended him and said, get this woman away from me now, and bolt the door after her. Now she had on her a long sleeved garment, for such robes the king's virgin daughters used to be dressed. Then the attendant took her outside, bolted the door after her. Tamar put ashes on her head, rent her long sleeved garment that was on her, and she laid her hand on her head and was crying aloud as she went away. Tragic scene, absolutely tragic scene. And here it is, 3,500 years later, and it still makes a guy like me angry with this guy Amnon. If I'm not sure I could have waited like Absalom did the 2 years to go and take care of business there. So as soon as Amnon had his way with Tamar, he was done with it. I mean, uh, it said that his loathing for her, his lust had turned into loathing, and perhaps I don't know, maybe it was a self-loathing that just caught a hold of him, and but I wouldn't be that gracious to him. I just thinking he was a scoundrel, and he was the king's firstborn, and looked at himself as being the heir, going to be the next king, and so he could do whatever he wanted to. That's called the divine right of kings and all that kind of foolishness. Um, but he told the servant to get rid of her, get her out, and see, that was more of a shame than the actual act of being raped, because then that way he is putting her out and not doing anything for her protection, for her upkeep, or maintenance, or anything like that. Plus, she was a virgin. If he had raped her, very likely there would have been evidence of that deed in her clothing. And so here she has to go back home um, in that state, and just a sorry, sorry, sorry state of affairs. And so she was talked about how this dress that she had on had long sleeves, and so she tore it. It would have been a very special dress, and she just tore that thing up and put ashes on her head, and went into the normal mourning type rituals or the practices of the people of that day, and when they were in deep mourning. So so anyway, obviously, she was. Well, go ahead. I'll go ahead with verse 20. Um, then her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you?" In other words, has he violated you. And so now, my sister, keep quiet. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart. But Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard about all these things, he was very angry. Absalom did not say a word to Amnon, either good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had raped his sister Tamar. All right. Tamar actually, obviously very upset, naturally very upset, because now she was no longer a virgin, and therefore she was basically not um, not eligible, not worthy, or whatever, not available to be a bride of royalty, or in many cases, maybe not even a bride of anyone. And in fact, the Bible says that she remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Now, that does desolate there does not mean that she was just in a grand funk all the time. That it just that she cried and had deep depression and so forth. No, desolate meaning that she did not marry and have children, and that sort of thing, become the nice Jewish mother that all Jewish girls like to become. And so this was denied her. Her whole life was destroyed with this one act by Amnon. And so Amnon had condemned her to a life of shame throughout all Israel, because that sort of thing would get all around town. And Absalom, he kind of quickly figured out what had happened. And even at this point right there, he was starting to plot his revenge. And it said that David was angry when he heard about the rape, but did you notice there's nothing there that he did? He did absolutely nothing about it. Now, possibly because, it was very, very close to what he did when he was with Bathsheba, and whether or not she was a willing participant, we don't know. And there was last week we had a little difference of opinion as to whether she was the victim or the conniver, and either way, it was she was married and off limits to David. Tamar was a sister to Amnon and therefore off limits. Both of them were off limits, and therefore, it was a sin, and David didn't do anything about it. He was pretty good with dealing with his subjects and with his enemies. He knew how to deal with his own people and with his enemies, but he was not so much good in dealing with his own family, and that's we see that throughout history with people that kings and leaders, and they're pretty good with everyone else, but then when it comes to meting out justice to their own family, they are very reluctant to do that. And I think any of us with a little bit of honesty would say, yeah, I kind of understand how that goes. So anyway, verse 23 to 29 says, it came about after 2 full years that Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. Then Absalom came to the king and said, see, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants come with your servant. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let's not go. Let's not all go. We don't want to be burdensome to you. Though he urged him, he would not go, though he blessed him. Then Absalom said, if not, then please let my brother Amnon go with us. Why should he go with you? The king said to him. But when Absalom pressed him, he let Amnon go with him, along with all of the king's sons. Then Absalom commanded his young men, saying, now watch Amnon until his heart is merry with wine. When I tell you, strike Amnon, then put him to death. Have no fear, isn't it I who commanded you? Be strong, be sons of valor. And so Absalom's men did to Amnon as Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up, each mounted his mule and fled. All right, Baal Hazor. that was where they were at. They were having a sheep shearing party. All right, and that is what it means is it's Baal's. It says something about a courtyard. Hatzor is a courtyard or a village, and it's Baal's village would be what it would mean, and it's on the borders between the territory of Ephraim and Benjamin, and so that was it was property that was owned by Absalom, and um, so now this is not the same city called Hatzor that is up further north, further east, which was a very great trading city, and also uh, it was a fortress. That's the one that Joshua had burned in the conquest of Canaan. Difference. One of them's just plain Hatzor. This one's Baal Hatzor. And during a sheep shearing, there was always a lot of well, there's just a lot of eating and drinking and festivities and feasting and because it's a joyous time. Okay, you're cutting the sheep and are cutting the fleeces off of them, and they'll be sold, and there's money to be made and so forth. So every year the sheep shearing would have been a very joyous time, and therefore nothing unusual about Absalom inviting all of his brothers to come up and celebrate. And but he instructed. He had some extra instructions that when Amnon got good and wasted, then on his command they were to kill Amnon. And notice he didn't do it himself. He got other people to do it. And as soon as this happened, though, all the other sons of David that were there, they did not stick around to see if they were next, if this was some kind of a palace intrigue of some sort, or a purge or anything like that. They got up on their mules and they fled. It's just from an agricultural standpoint, I guess. I noticed that they fled on mules, and you'd think of a king's son that he would be riding a a big old white steed, or a coal black one like Zorro rode, or those kind of things. That's what you would think of, but no, these guys they were on mules, and so evidently this was the choice of mount for the sons of David. And again, it's kind of interesting that in the Bible it says that it says to not interbreed two different kinds of animals, horses and donkeys. Um, and I don't know if that was that's all it says, and I don't know if that's an actual prohibition, because horses and donkeys, they're pretty, they're very very similar. But what the offspring of a horse and a donkey is a mule, and a mule is sterile. A mule cannot um, uh, cannot reproduce, and in fact, that's one of the things in the Bible that talks about something being as rare as a mule's placenta. And you'd read through that and okay, yeah, gross. But what that is saying is something like we would say that that's as rare as hen's teeth, because chickens don't have teeth, mules don't have placentas because they cannot breed. And so anyway, that was just another one of those interesting asides that I look at and says, huh, okay. And actually, um, in American history, there are quite a few generals or leaders and so forth that actually preferred mules to ride as opposed to horses, especially if they were riding into battle, because they were more sure-footed and didn't spook as easily. George Washington was one that he had a good mule that he rode. In fact, George Washington was one of the premier breeders of uh, I said breeders of the horses and donkeys, of making mules in the early days of the United States. He had some of the finest mules anywhere in the colonies, and then there were some others. Robert E. Lee was another one, the general from the Confederacy, that he liked mules. And then later on in the Old West, there were a lot of guys that were explorers or cowboys or whatever that they rode mules because they were more sure-footed, steadier, stronger, and not as maybe as flighty as some horses would be. All right, enough of that. Now we don't know. Going on to any comments or questions so far? Okay, so verse 30. While they were on their way, a report came to David saying, Absalom has killed all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Then the king stood up, rent his clothes, lay on the ground, and all his courtiers were standing by with their clothes rent. But Jonadab, son of David's brother Shemaiah, said in response, my Lord must not think that they have killed all of the young men, the king's sons, for only Amnon has died. For from Absalom's mouth this has been determined since the day he raped his sister Tamar. Now therefore, my lord the king must not take the report to his heart, thinking that all the king's sons are dead, for only Amnon is dead. Now, I don't know how that the word got back from Baal Hatzor back to Jerusalem before these guys who were hightailing it on their mules, they got back. But possibly what happened is that they took off and they were kind of hiding along the way, or whatever, and then a messenger got all the way back to Jerusalem before they did. It doesn't really tell us, but they told the king, and of course he immediately went into the ancient Near East customs of mourning. They tore their clothes, and a lot of drama. Putting the fall to the ground, dirt on their faces, that sort of thing. And that's what that's the way they express their grief. And back in those days, it was okay. Guys would cry. They would do all of those kind of things. They did not hold it in, okay, because John Wayne had not been invented yet. So and to tear your clothes. Remember, clothes, people only had maybe one or two sets of clothes, and kings differently, but regular people would only have one or two sets of clothes. And so for them to tear something was they were destroying something that was valuable to them. So and Jonadab, the great instigator of all of this trouble, came to David with the report that no, only Amnon was killed. And then he implicated Absalom by name as being the murderer. And so I don't know if he was trying to curry favor with the king, or what his plan was. Like I said, the guy was definitely an expert at palace intrigue, and he was one of the sneaky kind of guys in the whodunits that you watch on TV, that you never know. Okay, is he a good guy, a bad guy, or just after him for himself? I think he was for himself. Verse 34. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. When the young watchman lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, there were many people coming down the road behind him on the hillside. Then Jonadab said to the king, the king's sons have just arrived. It's just as your servant has said. As soon as he finished speaking, behold, the king's sons arrived. They lifted up their voices and wept, and also the king and all his courtiers wept very bitterly. All right. So Amnon, the heir apparent to David's throne, had been shamefully murdered by one of David's own sons. And so you remember last week when we were talking with Nathan came to David and said, okay, you have sinned. And David said, yes, I have. I'm sorry. And, but again, there are consequences for sin. And David didn't die, but what? David's son died. The one from the union with Bathsheba. He never survived past infancy, and so these words of Nathan that the sword shall never depart from your house, that must have been ringing in David's ears here, and he he would have obviously, I think, been could not have missed the similarity between Absalom's murder of Amnon and his own murder of Uriah. And both David and Absalom, they procured the help of others to bring about the murder. Okay, they did not. They didn't do it themselves. They got somebody else to do it. And you can look at Amnon's incestuous rape of Tamar, and David. That was kind of sort of the same thing that David did. So in both instances, the victim was brought to the residence of the adulterer, and so this is not the end of God's punishments on David, and there's going to be a whole lot more in store. We'll look at these in the weeks to come. But in 37, but Absalom fled, and he went up to Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. David mourned for his son every day, and so Absalom fled, went to Geshur, and remained up there for 3 years. Then King David so longed to go out for Absalom, for he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. All right, and that the wording there is really weird, isn't it? I mean, that he was comforted that his oldest son was dead. No, it's just that the time had the old deal about time heals all wounds, and it also what's the other? Time heals all wounds, and it also wounds all heals. But Absalom went up here to Bethsaida, this area at Bethsaida, on the north end of the Sea of Galilee. That's where you see that. All right, and so that's where we're at. Okay, so Absalom was, no doubt, he was welcomed into the court of his maternal grandfather. He was a pagan king who probably approved of what Absalom had done. He had wreaked revenge against one of his own brothers for a despicable act, and David was angry with Amnon, but eventually, and also angry with Absalom for killing Amnon. But eventually, David, his grief kind of diminished, and he would really like to have seen Absalom come back. But Matthew Henry, the great expositor on the Bible, said that time wore off David's grief of Amnon, but it also wore off entirely too much his detestation of Absalom's terrible sin. He was sad that Amnon was killed, but he wasn't sad enough about Absalom's sin. He should have still punished Absalom. So this little this paragraph here is it's a little bit difficult. This whole chapter is a very, very difficult chapter as we close it out and go into chapter 14. Any comments or questions so far? Okay. Cynthia said she For some reason, she can't get online. It kicked her off. Okay. No, Jerusalem was not a city of refuge. Okay. Okay. Now she's asking. Cynthia's asking the question about the cities of refuge. Now, if you listen to my sermon on yesterday, it was on the cities of refuge. Cities of refuge were only for those deaths that we could classify as manslaughter, not murder, not premeditated murder. And in this case, this was just straight up and down murder of Amnon, and so. Okay, so the question was, could he be called a blood avenger for his sister's rape? No, because the blood avenger was not allowed to exact the death penalty on anything other than a death, and so uh, Absalom could not go to a city of refuge, and he was also not considered the kinsman avenger, other than had he would have to have captured Amnon, brought him before the king, and made a big deal out of it. And he pretty much knew that if he had done that, David probably wouldn't have done anything about it anyway, and there would have been a big deal. So Absalom felt the only thing he could do was to go ahead and murder Amnon, because he hated him anyway. So, but yeah, cities of refuge, even though we see it now in chapter 14 spoken of, it did not apply to Absalom at all. All right, so chapter 14. Now Joab, son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was on Absalom. So Joab sent word to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there. He said to her, "Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning clothes. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but be like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead." And um, then go to the king and speak to him these words. Then Joab put the words in her mouth. Now, Tekoa, that is right here. You see where Jerusalem is, and Bethlehem about eight or so miles south of Jerusalem, and then another 4 or 5 miles down the road is Tekoa. All right, and there's also a town in West Texas called Tekoa. Had some relatives that were born and raised there. But anyway, the Tekoa was probably the birthplace, or Joab was born somewhere around there, possibly, and that whole area around Bethlehem. That's where David and all of his father Jesse was from, and so Joab sent back to Tekoa someone that he knew and that he could trust with his little scheme. And so, but that's where Tekoa is, and this is kind of what it looks like today. And there's been, in the last couple of 3 years, there have been some pretty gruesome attacks on the Jewish population there, and pretty bloody, and um, they're still in a turmoil today on the annexation of parts of the West Bank. There are some factions of Jewish settlers, as well as the Arabs there, that believe that the annexation of the West Bank is not going to help them in their living down there in Tekoa. And I don't even pretend to understand their reasoning for that, but that is just things that go on today. That's still it's still a town today, and people still live there after 3,500 years. So Tekoa, the name means trumpet. You remember when we do Rosh Hashanah, we'll be doing that in a few weeks. One of the trumpet sounds is tekiah. It is a derivative of this word tekoa, to trumpet. And so Joab's motivation here was probably very personal. Absalom was the best prospect of succeeding David to the throne. And so Joab thought that his action or an action on his part would be the best way to secure himself against the punishment which he deserved for the murder of Abner. Remember that Joab had killed Saul's general Abner in kind of sneaky circumstances, and so he probably had that kind of hanging there in the back of his mind that one of these days David might remember this, and he might wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide, all right, Joab, you're going to pay for what you did so many years ago. And so here he's still trying to ingratiate himself back, with the king, making sure that he's still a friend of the king. Okay, so Adam Clark, who's another expositor of the Bible, said the principal facts in this wise woman's story could have been real, and that Joab found a person whose circumstances conformed to that which he wished to present. Now his opinions appear to be unacceptable because some people think that that couldn't be. Adam Clark is normally pretty good, but remember what the Bible says that Joab told the lady, says, go and pretend to be a mourner. And so she was, the whole thing was a fabrication. So verse 4. When the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, just like they do, the kowtowing, and bowed down and said, "Help, O king." And he says, "What's the matter with you?" The king said to her, "Truly, I am a widow. My husband is dead." She said, "Your handmaid had 2 sons, but the one of them fought with each other, but the 2 of them fought with each other in the field, where there was no one to separate them. So one struck the other and killed him. Now behold, the whole clan has risen up against your handmaid and said, hand over the one who struck down his brother, so we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he slew. So they will also destroy the air and extinguish my one remaining ember, leaving to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." So she's saying the whole family has risen up against your handmaid. All right. Well, this this is kind of a throwback to David, that now that maybe she's saying, all of the king's sons and the whole court were against Absalom, and that with this knowledge, then David, maybe that was what was hindering David from being merciful and bringing Absalom back. Going on, then the king said to the woman, "Go to your home. I will issue an order concerning you." But the woman of Tekoa said to the king, "My lord the king, let the iniquity be on me and on my father's house, but may the king and his throne be innocent. Whoever speaks to you," said the king, "bring him to me, and he shall not touch you anymore." "Please let the king remember," she said, "Adonai your God," she said, "so that the avenger of blood does not destroy anymore, so they won't destroy my son. As Adonai lives," he said, "not one hair of your son will fall to the ground." So basically what she's saying is, yeah, okay, he deserves to die because her son would deserve to die, but she says, let the guilt rest on me and not not the her son. And so she was willing to accept this guilt on herself. And um, so that would to him not being punished would have been a violation of Torah. And so she's saying, okay, let it all fall on me, but just save my son. And so then the woman, uh, she wasn't satisfied with David's response, his promise. She requested that he reinforce it with an oath, by Adonai. And so she's making this trying to make a stronger case. And that the avenger of blood slay no more. The avenger of blood was the nearest, that's what we've talked about. The avenger of blood be the nearest of kin to the murdered man, and his duties, and it's outlined in Numbers 35 and also in Deuteronomy 9, that they were to go after the person because murder was not to be condoned by any means in Israel. That innocent blood was not to be shed for any reason. And so this lady was saying, yeah, I know it's against Torah, but let me be punished for it, but let my son live. And so going ahead, then the woman said, please let your handmaid speak a word to my lord the king. She keeps at it. She keeps going. Say on, he said. The woman said, why have you devised a situation just like this against God's people? For by speaking this word, the king is like the guilty one, by not bringing back the one he banished. For we will all surely die and be like water spilt on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away life, but rather he devises plans so that a banished person may not remain an outcast from him. She's talking about the cities of refuge here, the devised plans. So now the reason I came to speak this word to my Lord the king is because the people have made me afraid. So your handmaiden thought, I must speak to the king. Perhaps the king will fulfill the request of his maidservant. Surely the king will hear to deliver his maidservant from the hand of the one who would eliminate both me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. See how she shifted back to her own story, even though that she threw that little bit in there that would lead David toward thinking about Absalom. Then your handmaiden also thought, please let the word of my lord the king bring relief. For like an angel of God, talking about flattery, so is my lord the king to discern good and evil. So may Adonai, your God, be with you. All right. So she just keeps at it and at it. And so she brings this case up and tries to draw out the similarities. The lady's really good at what she's doing here. And and what she's saying is that if you've done right what in regards to my son, how is it that you can harbor such a vengeance against poor Absalom to keep him one of God's people, an outcast in a heathen country up there, Gesher, far from the worship of God of Israel? And so she's saying that you're guilty as these people that are wanting to kill my son. And so she just kept going and going, and finally, she ends up with flattery. The king is like an angel of God to discern good and evil, and so he is going to be. He is the king, and he makes those kind of decisions. And David he made some good decisions, but he made some that were not so good. But that's she's really drawn it to a close here. Then the king, and in verse 18, then the king answered and said to the woman, please do not hide anything from me concerning what I'm about to ask you. Please let my lord the king speak, the woman said. Then the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? And she was caught. She was flat busted here. So, as your soul lives, my lord the king, the woman answers, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. In other words, yeah, you got me. Yes, your servant Joab was the one who commanded me and put all these words in the mouth of your handmaid. Your servant Joab did this thing in order to bring about a change in the situation. But my Lord is wise, like the wisdom of an angel of God. There she throws that back in at him again, to know all that goes on in the land. So, um, David, he's finally starting to look at this and says, "Oh man, um, this um, this is sounding awful lot like uh, Joab is orchestrating this thing again." I mean, Joab was a nephew. He had known David had known him all his life, and possibly Joab was even older than David because of he was one of his uncle's sons that could have been born before David. So David is suspected, and the lady says, "Yep, you're right. He is the one." So finally, then the king said to Joab, "Look, I will do this thing. Go and bring Absalom back." Joab fell on the face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. Then Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, since the king has done the word of your servant." So Joab got up, went to Geshur, brought Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king said, he may go to his house, but he may not see my face. So Absalom went directly to his own house and didn't see the king's face. So David grants the request. He brings Absalom home, but it's not a full forgiveness, because he said, "I don't want to see him. He can come home, he can be back with his family, but I don't want to see him." And so that is that there's still a wall there between Absalom and David, and David is not in the mood for a full pardon and so forth, and so there's still some bitterness in there, and he says he's not to come in my presence. So um, in some ways it may be kind of hard to explain, but okay, it could be that the reason that he didn't want um, Absalom back is it could be from the influence of Bathsheba, because remember at this point now um, that Solomon, who would actually be the next king, would be about 7 or 8 years old, and so um, having Absalom come back and be in court and so forth, that would really complicate things for Bathsheba's plans for her own son to ascend to the throne. We don't know, but that's what David said. So anyway, now in all Israel, 25, now in all Israel, there was none as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. When he cut the hair of his head at the end of every year, he would cut it because the hair was so heavy on him. He had to cut it. The weight of the hair from his head was 200 shekels by the royal weight. And to Absalom were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So evidently, let's look at it. David was considered a very handsome man. Abigail, the mother, was a beautiful woman by all accounts. And then her children, Absalom and Tamar, were beautiful people. So they were, my goodness, they could have been Kardashians back in the day. Just the beautiful people, because they were beautiful people, because that's who they were, beautiful people. And he had the long hair, flowing hair, and 5 pounds. Okay, that's what 200 shekels by the royal weight was about 5 pounds of hair. Can you imagine that every year going to the barber and having your hair cut off and weighing it, and it's 5 pounds of hair? That's one hairy dude, I can tell you. But then it also talks about that he had 3 sons and a daughter, and he named her Tamar, probably after his own sister. It said she was a beautiful woman. So uh, this paragraph's probably included to it's just an account, kind of preparatory, because we know that if you read ahead that Absalom is dies later on in the in a revolt against David. um but some people, as um the hair thing, that a guy that had long flowing hair back in those days would have been considered, that was a big manly thing. If you're a hairy guy, was a manly guy. And so that's just kind of a paragraph that's stuck in there. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem, but he never saw the king's face. And Absalom went to Joab in order to send him to the king, but he was unwilling to come to him. So he sent word again the second time, but he still would not come. And so he said to his servant, "See, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Go set it on fire." And so his servants set the field on fire. Well, that got Joab's attention. Joab arose, came to Absalom at his house, and said, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" And he said, "Look, I sent word for you, and saying, 'Come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur?' It would be better for me if I were still there. So now let me see the king's face, and if there's iniquity in me, let him put me to death." And so Joab went to the king and told him. When he summoned Absalom, he came to the king, bowed down on his face to the ground before the king, and then the king kissed Absalom. All right, so he'd been under house arrest pretty much for 2 years, and Joab was not at all secure enough to go to the king and says, "Okay, you said you didn't want to see Absalom, but you really need to see Absalom." No, he wasn't willing to do that. And so if a guy is under kind of this house arrest, where the king, his own son, will not see him, the king's will not see his own son, who's actually the next in line for the throne, then people were going to say, "Well, you know what? This guy he's not in good graces. I don't want to be seen with him, because I don't want to seem like I'm against the king or whatever."